Hi, and thank you for tuning to the Fight Zone podcast. In this episode, I talk with Jake Smith from Fight and Talk. Jake is a sport journalist covering the MMA sport in the UK, Ireland, and IMMAF. For insight of ever-evolving fight scene in this part of the world, follow his Fight and Talk show at Facebook, Fight and Talk, Twitter and Instagram, Fight and Talk, and YouTube. All links in the description. We talk about the consequences of the extended lockdowns in Europe over the amateur and professional sports, measures promoters are taking to create bubbles and keep going with shows, and athletes' pathways from grassroots to professional level. Having a professional journalist on the podcast, the whole conversation, the phrase "who interviews the interviewer" was pushing me smiling. At least having Jake talking from the UK guarantees this time at least half of the people in the episode do not have heavy Eastern European accent. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did.
Why do we fight? To protect home and family. To preserve balance and bring harmony. For our kind, the true question is, what is worth fighting for? The Fight is All podcast.
Okay, we're on. Thanks for having the time. At least we got it right this time. And can you please start with some of your background, how you got involved in the combat sports, and after this, how you get involved in IMMF?
Yeah, absolutely, Seb. So my combat sports sort of journey, if you like, started back when I was at university. I was studying sports journalism at the University of Sunderland in the UK, and we were told by our lecturers from a very early stage, look, everybody wants to be a football or soccer writer, so try and find a unique sport or something that is a little bit different. And one of my housemates at the time, he worked in a local restaurant, and one of the waiters there had a fight coming up, this MMA fight, and my friend wanted to go, so I was like, yeah, I'll come along with you, see what it's about, have a little watch. And when I got there, it was a show called Made for the Cage over here in Newcastle in the northeast. And I got there and just the crowd, the atmosphere when you first walked in, the camaraderie with the fighters, the intelligence, and it was something I'd never seen before, I guess, in sport, with like athletes going from boxing to kickboxing to Muay Thai to Jiu-Jitsu, such like seamless flowing between different disciplines within like the same bracket of a sport. And I instantly got the MMA bug. I was hooked. And yeah, it sort of just really started from there. So the event finished, and I found one of the lads who fought in the main event on Facebook, and I sent him a message and asked if I could do an article for the uni website. He agreed, so I'd done an interview with him, posted it on the university website, and then I was approached by Made for the Cage to do a little bit of work for them. So I started doing that, and then in my final year I got access to a studio and started my own media outlet, like MMA media outlet, called Fight and Talk. So got started with that, and that developed. Initially, it was a 6-part podcast, and then I moved more into the shorter form journalism, doing videos, 10-15 minutes with athletes who had fights upcoming or athletes who had just won previous weeks. And it all started from there. Then I started covering the likes of Bellator, Cage Warriors, and traveling around the UK covering them events. And then earlier this year, I was approached by the IMMAFs and asked if I would be interested in coming on board as a website contributor. And yeah, that's where we're at now.
So, if someone asks who interviews the interviewer, that's me now.
That's you now, yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you have time to train yourself with all this traveling and interviewing?
Yeah, so it was my first podcast guest, Cal Pacino Eleanor, Bellator. He previously fought on against James Gallagher in their last fight. And Cal is from the northeast, and I'd done an interview with him, and he'd asked me, was I interested at all in training? It was never something I'd done before, and I was enjoying the university lifestyle, shall we say. So there was a lot of parties, a lot of takeaway food, so I wasn't in the best of shapes. And yeah, I decided to give it a go, and it's just the striking at the minute I'm doing. I'm nowhere near even a decent amateur level, but it's something that I'm doing once, twice a week. Well, not at the minute, but yeah, once, twice a week, hitting pads, trying a little bit of sparring every now and again. And I think it's something, especially as a media member, I think it's too easy for us sometimes to criticize athletes without actually understanding what's happening. So for me, I thought it was vitally important to get in that cage myself and start learning the different disciplines. And I think it gives you a different perspective, especially when you're covering the sport, as to certain positions, especially in the ground game. That was something for the first, I'd say, probably 6 to 10 months. It was something that I didn't have any experience in at all. And I was watching a fight go to the ground and realizing that until I'd seen somebody tap, I hadn't saw the submission coming. And so that was something that I wanted to develop in myself to give myself a better understanding of the sport for then ultimately covering it.
Yeah, that's very right because I mentioned, being as a coach and former athlete myself, uh, it's very bad impression when sometimes you have a commentator on a journalist who is not trained and he doesn't see in most of the things that someone who trains and fight, and you can see that from his covering the fight. So it's really important, to be at least involved in the sports, at least for fun, because that lets see what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think it's something that's important as well, and it gives not necessarily more respect, but it's something that I think an athlete that is at the top level appreciates slightly more if you are not even competing yourself, but training and trying to teach yourself by doing the sport. I think for especially these top level athletes, and when they're looking, and I approach lots of athletes for interviews, and I think it's nice for them to see that I'm not just somebody sitting behind the computer screen and working away. And well, when they've worked, let's say, for 12 weeks of a fight to then get submitted in the first round, I'm not then jumping on them straight away with no sort of background or idea on what's happened in that fight.
Yeah, that's for sure. Uh, so we was chatting like quite a bit around the situation in UK compared to here in Australia, because you took this brief interview from me for the Queensland Open that we just did. So what's the situation now at your end?
Not good. In short, it's so yes, we got put into lockdown March 2020, so we're coming up to a year now. When the lockdown initially hit, it was everything shut apart from essential retail, so your food shops, grocery shops, and hospitals and the likes. We were in that for around 6 months, which took us up to September. And then we had, I think it was like a 2-3 week respite where gyms could open up again and people could train and we'd go and see our friends and socialise, mix households. That was something that was massive. I hadn't saw my grandparents, my elderly grandparents, for I believe it was about 7 months at that point because we weren't allowed to mix two households. Um, then yes, after September we got put back into another lockdown, same as the first one that came about in March, where no training for athletes unless you were professional. Um, in that until December, we got, I think it was 5 or 6 days leeway in around Christmas time, and then yeah, a few weeks back, start of the year, we got put back into our third lockdown, which was again the same as March last year, where we have a roadmap for the end of this lockdown, which is meant to be June the 21st, but we'll wait and see. There's another variant of the virus currently in the UK. The government are, well, as they have been throughout the whole thing, slow on the uptake, so it's a case of we had 6 people come in with a new variant. 5 of them they've managed to track, the 6th they haven't. So we're still now very wary that June the 21st date will come around and that actually we'll get back to normal with that. The likes of your amateurs haven't been able to train at all. Professional athletes, mixed martial artists, are now allowed to train, as it's of course work for them, so they're allowed to work. But yeah, it's been a rough year, especially for the domestic scene, and something that I'm sure you'll appreciate as well as a coach, that especially your young amateurs that are coming up, or your amateurs who are just about to turn pro, that last 18 months before they either make that step foot into the cage for the first time or before they pull on them 4 ounce gloves for the first time is vital important for their development. And this massive layoff, I think, could have quite a big effect on how we see the progression of our amateur athletes over the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, well, that's devastating for the sport, and I not necessarily agree with all the measures they take, but it's very hard to to work with that, and we had like a hard walk down here in Melbourne, and I have colleagues there who are working there, so there was not a wall to train like in together. Like I also like here in Queensland, I lost my gym, and I'm about to reopen soon on a new place for the same reason. Like and luckily I kind of I had a feeling, and I was like I kind of foreseeing the thing, so I quit my rent, and I canceled my rent, and I stopped it just before they actually walked it, so it didn't really was much, but there was I had like a 2 months gap. I was not able to train. Then we practically now, like since then, we train in a garage, like old Eastern European style, which doesn't bother me. I'm kind of used to it. But and luckily the guys that I train, I was only the guys who compete. Uh, they adapted to it, so now like now we're about to move to a bigger place. But yeah, it was rough for everyone, especially like big gyms and people who are running like one of the biggest gyms in Melbourne. I think Kid Dale.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of their gyms they had to close was a massive gym with like 10 meters wide cage, and like one of the biggest gym in Melbourne. They was forced to close forever. It was very hard, and they're very well developed gym, but unfortunately they things put an end to this. Like, it's very sad.
Yeah, it's been a very sad state of affairs with that. That's happened a lot over here, where there's gyms that have been around maybe 20 years, and you see on their social media that the coach is posting that he's had to close the doors and won't be able to reopen. One of the biggest cases one of the most publicised cases, especially over here, was the gym that Philip Mulpeter's at. It's one of the SBG gyms. Of course, SBG synonymous with Conor McGregor, John Kavanagh. And that gym was going to have to close, but Conor McGregor heard about this and trained with Philip Mulpeter for years, and Conor stepped in and saved that gym. But it got to a point where it wasn't then just a case of these gyms with 5, 6 maybe athletes in. You're talking about gyms with tens and tens of people in there, maybe upwards of 60 regular competing athletes, and they were also getting struck by this lockdown. One promotion, one of the biggest in Europe, Cage Warriors. I'm not sure if you're familiar with. Graham Boylan, Ian Dean, and that whole team deserve so much credit. So the UK was told midweek back March last year that it was this certain Sunday, I think it was the 20th of March, 22nd of March, around then, that as of midnight that night, the whole country's in lockdown. And Cage Warriors were meant to have a show the night before. So this announcement came on the Tuesday. They had the show on the Saturday. The show was originally meant to be in London. The venue then cancelled on Cage Warriors and said, we can't host your show. So within the space of 5 days, Cage Warriors managed to find a new venue, move all their athletes to this new city. They moved to Manchester instead of London, and they still managed to put the show on. And it was the last live sporting event in the UK before the national lockdown. Graham Boylan, of course, the chairman, then went to the government and said, look, this is how we're going to run events from now on. These are the precautions we're going to put in place. Here's the protocols. And they managed to get government backing for events. So since we've been in lockdown, the Cage Warriors team have managed to make sure their athletes can train. So if they're needed for a fight, they can fight. They've managed to put on 6 shows last year in September and December. And government backing is now continued into this year, which means even though we're still in another lockdown, in 2 weeks' time, they're allowed to put on another 3 shows back to back to back. Because from the very start, Graham knew it was important to keep these athletes fighting, keep the promotion alive as well, and done everything in their power to keep things going for both themselves and for the athletes and for the fans. And yeah, they've done a tremendous job.
So how they're doing it? I guess there's no public, just the fighters and coaches, closed doors. pay-per-views and stuff. That was, I suppose, what they're doing.
Yeah, so Cage Warriors have a deal with UFC Fight Pass. So all their events are broadcast live on UFC Fight Pass. Their first event in September, if you were fighting on the Thursday, you had to show up at the hotel on the Sunday before. You had to self-isolate by yourself, no coaches, no anything, in your room for 48 hours. You'd then get your COVID result back, and if you were negative, they then had a section of the hotel that was purely for Cage Warriors staff and fighters. They then obviously had to cut the weight, weigh in. That was fine. The weigh-ins were stagnated as well, so not everybody was in the same room at the same time. Pass that second COVID test after you've weighed in. That's fine. You're clear to fight. And in the venue, I believe they were only allowing the fight that was in the cage and the fight next in the whole arena at one time, all behind closed doors, but to really try and keep everybody separate. So they've done so much work to make sure they could continue with their events. In the September show, I know they'd spoken to the government, and the government had allowed them to do the rapid COVID tests. So it meant they weren't having to isolate for 48 hours the week of the fight. They would go down, get put in a room, rapid COVID test, 15 minutes later, if you were positive, great, you're allowed in the bubble. If you were negative, you can't fight.
Sweet. Well, yeah, it's not easy. It's a lot of organization to do a bubble like that. Uh, uh, I made an episode like a couple of months before with the Friday edition. Jason, he works with UFC. He's now like works with what's the New Zealand team, the City Kickboxing. But so what they do in UFC, they're creating this bubble so the fighters actually cut weight under the supervision of the UFC dietitians and chefs and doctors and everything. So like everything happens actually on place. It's not like before you do it with your own coaches and stuff, which is from one point of view is nice because they kind of supervise the athletes because as a fight athlete you're keen to go to extremes, especially with the weight cut and stuff. So they kind of like now that's more measured, more scientifically safe. Sometimes I think once I was listening to his podcast, he has a very good podcast by the way. Once or twice they had to just stop a fighter from cutting and like cancel the fight because it's not healthy for him to make it, which very rarely will happen with fighter and a coach. Like you're just gonna push it through, just to make it. But which is good for professional fighters. Unfortunately, amateur fighters are not so lucky, and they cannot afford shows who are working with amateur fighters. They cannot afford so much because it's like they're not making so much, and I guess that's very hard, especially in UK. Like I know I had a fight in UK like back in the days, and since day one, like the beginning of the sport when it's like pretty much a very not so widely recognized. They have huge amateur scene, like a lot of small and tiny, like all kind of shows. Very good strikers, like traditionally from UK, like this traditional like English boxing school, and made a transition very good in all striking sports. This knowledge of the striking coaches transiting kickboxing. Kickboxing is very strong in UK. Generally, like UK guys have very good striking. Grappling since now is picking up. I told you when I was chatting, leading to this. I have a guy who is now training, competing there. He's my student, Stefan Petrov. He's competing in Polaris. Now he's also had these troubles that you're talking me about. They're not really able to train. Hopefully his girlfriend is training, so he kind of manage, to train together and to push this conditioning all the time. Like he say, like since we walked down, I've never been in better shape because I'm doing so much conditioning because I cannot row and spar. Yeah, it's well. Do you guys have any? Do they tell you like any time when they're gonna release the measures or something? Do you have any roadmap with that?
Yes, so the roadmap takes us up to June the 21st with no issues, but there's no word yet on when we're going to be back to full capacity in any sort of shows. Football, soccer events are naturally going to get the go-ahead first as they're outdoor. That's going to be another massive issue and something that's been pivotal throughout this coronavirus pandemic in the UK. That with MMA being indoors over here, I mean, an outdoor event would be lovely, but in July, I'm sure we'll still be having rain over here. So it's, what can you do? But with all the events being indoors, it restricts how many fans you could allow in, if at all, even more. So we've got no time frame on when fans will be allowed back into the event.
Well, here, luckily we have way better weather than UK.
Yeah.
Uh, like when we was in Walkdown XFC, which is the biggest promotion here. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they're the biggest promotion in Australia. They're doing like pro and amateurs in all states. They did couple of outdoor shows with with chairs, space chairs and all that. So they were able to pull it out. But yeah, I guess it's not easy in UK and in Europe in general, where like what was that? Okay, it's just springtime coming now. It was
Yeah.
kind of winter time up to now. I know in Bulgaria, where I'm from, they had the gyms closed for I think for a month or something, but they just reopened. But was very strange because what happened in Bulgaria, like it's Eastern Europe, right? So everything is like very messed up. So the fitness gym was closed, but the fight gym was open.
Yeah.
Eastern
Yeah.
Europe anyway. We can fight, but you cannot go live.
But like even that in the UK, we had that. So when we got put into a leveled system, so level one, tiered system, sorry, tier one, tier two, tier three, and if you were in tier three, you could train indoors as long as it wasn't a group activity, but a group counted as more than two people. So if somebody's training for a fight, they're not going to get the freshman rounds. They're not going to get jits in with several different athletes. It's been a really tough time. Bellator have handled things differently again. I know you had Ryan Spillane on a little while ago. Of course, he is now signed to Bellator from the IMMAF. He should have really made his pro debut last year, but because of the way that everything's played out, Bellator signed a host of European talent 2 years ago. And last year they only had 4 European shows within the space of 2 weeks, or 5 European shows, sorry, in the space of 2 weeks. But there were so many athletes then left out because there simply wasn't enough room on the cards. Again, they were behind closed doors. They'd done 4 shows in Italy and then they'd done 1 show in Paris when France opened up a little bit more. But yeah, it's been a very different time covering the sport. Even doing a lot more. I mean, it's slightly different for us, of course, being other sides of the world. But usually with fighters in the UK, I'd just travel to their gym and interview them there. But everything's had to be on Skype or on Zoom, and yeah, it's something I hope we don't have to get used to for too much longer.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of, like at least from our end, like it's kind of, there is white in the end of the tunnel. I hope like Bulgaria's getting better. Unfortunately, I have friends in Greece. They're still very bad. Uh, but I think it's easing up. In most countries, the initial panic about the virus is kind of, fading out, and hopefully finally, under the pressure of public, like the measures are getting more reasonable. Because at the end of the day, the virus is not going anywhere. Like and people are able to get their risks, right? So as long you know that there's something there, it's your responsibility. If you're gonna take measures, you're gonna take the risk. Of I believe that people who are like more prone to, more in danger from this virus, like elderly people and people with certain health issues, they have to be more careful. But you cannot keep the whole planet walk because of the virus. It's and I think there's like a massive realization that in the end of the day, the virus is not as deadly that everyone thought. Not everyone is dying left or right. So I have a lot of friends in Bulgaria who actually, had the virus, went through it. My own coach family, they all of them had it. His wife, his son is also training. Uh, he said he probably had it. He never felt about it. He's too tough, for a virus. But yeah, they had it. They went through it for a week, and yeah, it sucks. But you go on the other end, so it's not a big issue. One of my training partners, a very good friend, we actually had quite a lot of argument about the virus because he had it. He got panic, and we had a bit of argument about the virus stuff. He was smell and taste. Then when he was very panicked, and then they got back. So it's just another sickness, and in the end of the day you cannot walk upon it for a fool. Like it's a bad fool, but in the end days it's a fool, and then people get over it. So I hope that more reason will come in place, and things will start easing up like everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're stuck in an interest level as well, especially with the professional athletes. And going back to something you were talking about before on weight cutting, Hamza Chimaev and Leon Edwards are two prime examples of this, where these are two athletes who are at the very, very top of their game, very, very peak physical fitness. But because they will be cutting weight on the lead up to their fight, you see with both Leon and Hamza, we had that extended period of COVID. I know Hamza came out the other day. I know since then he said he was emotional and he didn't mean it, but he was contemplating retirement over it. It's that horrible catch-22 almost now, where is it worth for a while just saying to these top athletes, look, don't cut the weight you normally cut. By all means, cut a couple of kilos, but don't be overdoing it because then you're lowering your immune system, weakening that immune system, and we're stuck in an awkward position with that. Back Bellator Newcastle, February 2019, I was fortunate enough, one of the athletes invited me into his room because I'd never seen a weight cut before, and he invited me in. And he was cutting down to 61 kilo, 135 pound bantamweight. And he got on the scales that night, and the night before the weigh-ins, and he had 7.2 kilogram cut. And you think that during these times, if one of them cornermen is asymptomatic with the virus and passes it on to him, it could be so much more damaging to him. I'm not a big fan either of the UFC booking the way they did with Leon and Hamzat, a fight 2 weeks after they've had it, or 3 weeks after they've had it, because you don't know what these long-term effects are going to be. I completely agree with you that it is just a slightly worse flu. But I think some promotions could be doing more with their athletes to make sure that they're not cutting these dramatic amounts of weight. I mean, weight cutting's an issue, and I think it's going to be for as long as the sport exists. But especially in this time when there is a virus going around, it may be wise just to knock that on the head a little bit.
Well, with the weight cut, I might be biased, right? Because I myself I'll be cutting 8 kilos, like as a standard. I don't say everyone should cut 8 kilos. I apparently have this. I was genetically wacky. I had no problem cutting 8 kilos. That was my
So
standard trick. I
eight,
was
8 kilo the night before, sorry.
say a week before.
Right, okay.
With the water warding. So I was normally uh, I was competing in kickboxing first on 67. Then when I grew up slightly, I went up to 71. That was my weight when I was in the national team. Like I was doing K1 on 71. That was my main style. And then when I got in the Sambo national team, I was competing in three national teams in the same time. So Sambo, Sanda, and Sambo, and kickboxing. But on Sambo the weight was 68, then 75. So it was fairly small for 75. And on grappling rules, the weight difference makes a lot of difference in a fight. So I was too high for 75, and my grappling was not as good as later. So I had to cut to 68. So that's when my travels was, because like my fight weight was 71. So I had to make a compromise to cut two more extra kilos, which is a bit harder for me. But yeah, that was quite extreme. But the thing is, with the weight cutting, what I want to say is, it's very hard to restrict the athletes from weight cutting because that's part of the sport. It's always going to be a part of the sport. But I'm all about more science involved into this one. I cannot recommend more like uh, uh, my friend, the dietitian. You can find him on the internet, and he's working UFC now, but he has a very good podcast where he explained this for everyone how it's done and how it's properly done for the signs that you have to look for if you lose too much weight and stuff like that. Because the truth is, and I tell this by my experience, if you undercut too much, it actually damages your performance. You can actually become slower despite that you're white. You just train, and you cannot be so explosive. So there is a limit. Something that I learned from him, by the way, and never thought about is weight cutting depends also from your fighting style for a certain fight. So uh, it it might help you if in a certain fight you're about to grapple, might help to cut more weight to be heavy in the fight. But in the same time, if your game plan is more striking based in a certain fight, weight cutting is not in your favor because it slows you down, and also there is another detrimental effect. If you drain a bit the liquid in your skull that contains your brain, you're more prone to being dropped. So that's another thing that is dangerous for fighters who cut weight. So I'm all about more science and less rules. Not less rules, but I don't like, for example, what ONE FC is doing, because the thing is, they make this hydration test and stuff, but the thing is, if you understand weight cutting, it's very easy to cheat the hydration test. Okay, I won't say how to do it, but people who know how to cut weight and have experience with that, they know how to cheat. So it's not a big deal. Like, everyone is like giving the props to ONE FC for that, but in reality, if you know how to do it, it's very easy to cheat. Again, it's probably a step in the right direction, but in the same time, I would rather have more knowledge involved between the fighters and coaches on amateur level, because they cannot obviously, like, all of them afford like a fight dietitian on their head. It's not it's not easy for amateur fighters, but really, more knowledge and more understanding about the weight cutting process makes sense, especially in the environment like IMMAF competition, when you actually cut weight on the same day you fight. It's way different than professional matches when you have like 24 hours recovery. It's the day is very different, and you cannot actually cut so much weight. I would say, like, it's not, if you cut more than 4% with competing on the same day, that's going to be detrimental for your performance. It's just very different. And on tournaments like Oceania or like Worlds, IMMAF athletes, they have to show up on the scales every day. They fight every day, so they have to maintain the weight, let's say, for a week on the Worlds. So that's absolutely different approach to weight cutting.
Yeah, I think I don't even think I know the idea, especially in the pro game, of introducing smaller differentiates between weight classes. It could be an answer, but I don't think that is the case. I think if anything, then you're going to end up with possibly people cutting even more weight again, like a small welterweight. If they moved it to 165 and 175, and you've got a small welterweight, they're going to go, well, I'll cut another 2 kilo to get down to the 165 pound. I think it possibly causes more sort of questions and answers.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think about that's going to happen. If you introduce more weight classes, people are just going to cut for more. What it realistically, like, when you make any of those rules, you have to consider the mentality of the fighters. So fighters are special because they adjust with the rules, and they always try to find advantage, and that's fair. In the end of the day, you're fighting with another guy in the cage, right? So it's not the most healthy experience or like a hobby, let's say. So you're trying to get an advantage within the rules. So fighters will always do that. So it's not realistic to impose those rules and chasing fighters. That's not realistic. And won't happen. You cannot if you have let's say you have a big fight card, have 10 fights. You cannot chase 20 fighters like 2 weeks before to see if
No.
they're cutting or not. It's just impossible for a promotion from like smaller scale. So realistically, it's all about fighters and coaches being responsible for their health, knowing that this can damage their performance, knowing that this can damage their long-term development in the sport, and knowing how to do it right. So I'm all about that, but all those rules, people will just find a way, just to go around it. That's what's happening. That's how it works in fight game, unfortunately.
Yeah. I always find it really interesting as well when you look and you see. So there is a person from Team Wales turning pro, Scott Pedersen. He won bronze at the Europeans in 2016. He's turning pro this year. And he, like so many others, has made the decision that in stepping up and getting that extra 24 hours to drop a weight class. So he was lightweight, moving to professional levels, he's now dropping to featherweight. That's something that's really, really common to see. And I think it's normally quite interesting, especially with the likes of Scott, who's had quite a bit of time to transition from the amateur to pro game, the difference in their body from an amateur level lightweight to a professional featherweight.
Yeah, true. But again, the thing is, professionals can afford to do more stuff, while amateurs they cannot. Also, something else to consider: amateur athletes very often have a day job or something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's some additional work that very often is underseen, from coaches, because you cannot really follow what the guy is doing during the day. But let's say if he's doing some kind of construction work and carrying bricks all day, that's actually a work. So you have to consider that for this guy. You cannot train him, to cut 10 kills and to find the same week while he's working leading to the fight, and then he's pretty much like a bag of bones. You just drop him in the cage and you wait to see what happens. Yeah, it's not easy when you're amateur. You have to balance so much things, so much responsibilities.
What's that like at pro level in Australia then? Just on something you mentioned there, about do you have many professional mixed martial artists who have to juggle full-time jobs and their MMA, or generally do you find that there's more, if you're a professional mixed martial artist in Australia, that's all, like that is your work, or do you have people who do both work full-time and train?
Well, as everywhere else, there's some people on high level, for example Robert Whittaker and all those guys, Alex Volkanovski, who train full time. But realistically, most of the guys as numbers, they both work and train, which is not ideal, but unfortunately, that's the reality in sport. There are people in UFC who work and train.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've most recent example, and it comes back to the construction you just mentioned there. Perry Goodwin for Morgan Charrier for the Cage Warriors featherweight belt. I know Perry really well. We're from the same area. And Perry gets up in the morning at like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, goes and does scaffolding for 12 hours, and then drives 45 minutes to train at Team Fish Tank, and then drives 45 minutes home, and that's his day. And then he's got to cut weight on top of that, and then he's got to prepare for a world title fight on that, and it's a lot to juggle.
Yeah, and it's taxing on the body. And the thing is, I feel that on me, up to a certain age, you're pretty much immortal. You just go. But slowly with the age, it starts getting into days. I don't know if you heard this Viking legend. It's about Thor. He goes to see the giants, and they say, "Oh, you're too small. But to prove how strong you are, we're gonna make you wrestle an old lady." So they take an old lady, a granny, and they say, "Oh, I won't wrestle a granny. I'm strong. I want someone who is real points." They say, "No. Try to beat the granny." And so he starts wrestling with the granny, but the granny is very hard to beat. He wrestles, and he's not able to beat. And in the end, it happens that the granny is actually the age. So you cannot beat the age. It's always slowly drains you with all your powers. So yeah. It's very wise, you can see that, like you're immortal when you're young and you feel that you can beat everything, but with the time, and start draining a bit, maybe you have a couple of, injuries that kind of slow you down. So it's taxing on the body. So these have to be considered with from the coaches as well. So it's a tough game, but it's fun anyway. So let's speaking about the transition amateur professional. You have a very good overview over the scene in UK uh, and in the area around. So what would be your view for a proper transition from grassroots to amateur to professional level? As someone who follows the sport closely.
Yeah, it it's one of those where it can really differ from athlete to athlete, or potentially even from gym to gym. Certain gyms have certain things in place and want their athletes to grow certain ways. Um, what I find is we've got a lot, especially in the northeast, where I'm based. There's a lot of guys who fight is the C class and B class before they have a couple C class, B class bouts, which is C class, no head strikes, just body strikes, no strikes on the floor. Um, and you slowly see these athletes developing. I'm fortunate enough to commentate on a show in the northeast, and it's quite nice. Sorry,
So
go on.
sorry to interrupt you. C class, you don't have head strikes standing, like
Correct, yeah.
okay.
So these are very, very small children. Then obviously you move on in the B class, and it's the slight change in rules. But of course, still wearing big gloves. And then your amateurs, they can sort of start or do start anywhere around that 17-ish mark, sometimes a little bit younger. Um, but what the UK, and it's something, I mean, MMA is not necessarily regulated over here, but it's something that I think a lot of promoters are very conscious of, is matching certain athletes against each other. So making sure that you're not going to put in somebody making their amateur debut against somebody who's had 16 amateur bouts and they've won 12 of them. Um, a lot of it comes down now, especially in the UK and the sort of surrounding areas, to the coaching and the head coach being involved in taking sensible matchups for these athletes. I think especially at the amateur level, you get varying varying like amounts of appearances on the amateur scene with some athletes. So you may get some who only fight 3 or 4 times as an amateur and then turn pro. Then you have other athletes. A boy from the northeast called Robbie Brown. I believe he's on 26 amateur fights now, and he makes his pro debut in April. Um, uh, Even down to the shows, it's going to depend. So Cage Warriors again have this academy system, where it's amateur only shows, amateur only bouts, I believe, which gets the fans used to being in front of maybe a bit of a bigger audience and growing with that. Because when you're under them lights, when you make that walk, it could be intimidating, especially that first time. So yeah, it's interesting how the scene develops over here, because if, especially the likes of your Cage Warriors or Bellator, perfect case in point is Ryan Spillane, if they see somebody early doors who they think they've got something, you'll find, you look at Ryan, his pro debut is now going to be on Bellator. You've got several athletes who made their pro debuts on the likes of Cage Warriors. Leah McCourt from SBG Ireland, SBG Charlestown, she made her debut on Cage Warriors. It's an interesting route, and it's so different for everyone that it's hard to give a specific, they do X, Y, and Z, because so many fighters are so different.
Yeah, no, I was interesting for your opinion because I explained the way I'm doing this, and as a pathway, and that kind of like gives a kind of relatively clear way. So if you're just jumping into the MMA sport from some other sport, where you get in, so you come to the system. So I just I'm just collecting opinions, so I can
Yeah,
adjust this like accordingly.
absolutely. I think the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation plays a massive part in that as well, especially in Britain. We've got a lot of athletes who So they may have 5, 6 fights on the amateur scene, then apply or take part in the open day get selected for the team. Scott Pedersen, perfect example, making his debut on Cage Warriors. So he competed, I believe he had 7 amateur fights, then first took part in the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation World Championships in 2015, I'd want to say, and got knocked out in the first round. So for him, it was like, okay, I need to go back and reevaluate. He took another couple of fights on the local circuit, came back the next year, made it to the quarterfinals. Went away again, had another couple of bouts on the local scene, come back to the Europeans, and that was where he won his bronze medal in 2016. And that for him was a way of him gauging his development for turning professional, because 99% of the time, if you're just going to be fighting in the UK on domestic shows, you're going to only be facing other British fighters. Something that Scott really tips his hat to his confidence going into this professional game is the experience he's got through the IMMAFs fighting other top level opposition from different countries, because training is different from country to country. Certain athletes specialize in certain things. You mentioned it before with the British and their stand-up, their boxing. The Russians, I mean, you look at Khabib, you look at Zabit, it's that grappling, that wrestling style. And that's something Scott credits the IMMAFs for, the confidence he's now got going into his pro game, because he's had the opportunity to see what these other top level amateurs are like from elsewhere in the world. And from that, he believed he could gauge where he'll be at as a professional and when would be the right time for him to make the professional leap. Robbie Brown, who I mentioned before, 26 amateur fights, but he would like to have prior to COVID, would like to have had a run at the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, either the Europeans or the Worlds, to test himself and see where he is on there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of athletes that their final amateur bouts over here are on the IMMAF circuit before turning pro.
Well, I think that's the right pathway, and that's something that I want to educate the scene here in Australia, because what they find out from traveling the Western scene, like speaking as a guy like born in Russia and like grew up in Bulgaria, we are used to fighting tournaments because before MMA, like especially in Bulgaria, similar to Russia, sambo scene is very big. So sambo is very popular, and in combat sambo, it's very similar to what the IMMAF tournament is. You fight on the tournament. World Championship is always one day. One of my most terrible, like competition. I mean, like hard competition was World Championships in sambo, because you might have five fights for a day until you get to the medals, and they're all with tough guys and all in the same day. So you have like someone from Russia, from Belarus, from Dagestan, all these like terrible guys. They're good fighters. And the thing is, it's a very different approach, different mentality than what I find here in Australia. And I believe it's very similar in UK, where the amateur fighters fight single fight for a day, for a night. So they pretty much approach the same way as professionals do. So they have like the previous day, they do the cut, and then they fight on the next day. But in the same time, I find out this is very hard if you're a good amateur, because you have hard time finding fights. So what happens is if you're a good amateur and if you're lucky, you might get 3-4 fights a year, right? While in Russia, a regular guy, or like even my team in Bulgaria, like before all the lockdowns and stuff, we have these amateur tournaments and also combat sambo. So like healthy guys who are not injured, they fight every other month, and you do 4 fights for a tournament if you're winning. So for a year, let's say a guy who is training somewhere in Russia, he probably makes like 15-20 fights, might be more, if you exclude grappling and other stuff, which you don't count as real competition. Why the guys here, they get like four times less experience with those single fights, just as a cage time. And I think that's why it's important, to have these tournaments like we did here in Queensland, so the guys can actually get those experience regularly, and it's like everything dangerous if you do it often enough in 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 it's how to say measured trick, so you get used to it. It's like playing a video game. More you play, less you die. And it's the same with fighting. More you do, more you know how to defend yourself, and you get better into it. So if we have like regular tournaments, so I'm hoping I hope like we'll have like less odds this year, like meaning like walkdowns and stuff like we already talked, and we're able to run open tournament here in our state, and hopefully we start doing this in the other states slowly when they open. At least 2 more times, and we do this regularly. Like the guys have like 3-4 tournaments on Wakule where they can actually go fight. More often you're gonna fight the same people, right? In an area in a group, but you're getting this cage time, and then after 2 years with having like 30-40 fights, you're way different amateur than you were before. And hopefully, from what depends from us here, like I'm lucky, to have the support of the federation. They share the vision. Hopefully, with the next 2 years, I hope like we will be able to climb even higher in IMF. Like now, Australia is on the 5th place, but I think with having this chance for the guys to grow up within the IMF rule set and environment, and getting used to like cutting the same day and finding their range of weight and and performance weight, because there is also trick with that. You need a couple of competitions to find out on which weight you actually perform better, and to choose your weight class, especially if in this case when you're cutting and finding the same day. So some people can cut a bit more, some people cannot cut so much. So like I mentioned before, like I would say 4% just like an average, but there's some people who cannot cut. Some people like just perform better without any cut. So some people might not have to cut at all. Just go the weight you are, like your performance weight. It takes a couple of tournaments for a young and upcoming athlete to find his own, golden range of performance. And you have to be honest with that. Did my cut undermine my performance or not? Of course, you have to involve your coaches with that to find it out. But you need these regular tournaments when you're allowed to do your mistakes, right? Okay, you messed up my wrestling, you messed up your wake up. It's all right. Come after a couple of months, make the adjustment. Try it. Right? Try your own circuit before you go to to international. Before you go to so what depends from us, we're doing. Hopefully, we have the chance, to keep doing it this year.
Absolutely, and I think the amateur level is a perfect place to make their mistakes as well. It's all too often you see maybe some athletes turning professional too soon in their career when they haven't ironed out exactly what weight they want to be fighting at or exactly how much weight they should be cutting. They then manage to get themselves onto a major promotion like a Cage Warriors or a Bellator. They lose 2 fights then against this higher opposition, European or world opposition, and then they're back to square one. And it's as if the years they'd then spent building up to that point were lost because they hadn't done the work in the amateurs and through the likes of an IMMAF platform to find out exactly where they need to be.
You're absolutely right, and I would say at least that's what I'm telling to the guys I train. Get an international medal from IMMF, and then you can think about turning pro. Because as a coach, I want, and an athlete, I was always looking, to win the world championships. Okay, I was never world champion, but that was the goal that is guiding me as a process and as a coach. So you always have to think about yourself, about someone who wants to become world champion. So if you want to become world champion, what do you have to do? You have to take your steps. So once you become world champion as an amateur, then you can turn pro and start climbing. There is another advantage in that. IMF rules are way softer on the body, and now with the referees getting better and better, they're way better in protecting the fighters. So if you hold yourself and turn professional a bit later, after you become like IMMAF world champion, you have easy pass into big promotions like Bellator and UFC. But the advantage is you won't be that hurt as someone who was climbing to the UFC as professional, because guys like that they've hard fights, you know, generate injuries, which are always part of the sport. And the moment they actually get into UFC and they're like 30 plus years, they have only 5 years, you know, of good performance to try to climb to the top. Which sometimes is just, you know, speaking about like wrestling with an old lady of age, might be beating you just because you're coming down of your peak. You spend your peak while you're trying to climb to the UFC. While climbing up through amateur circle like IMMAF, uh, you're still far from your peak until you become world champion. So like when you get to these big promotions, you have the time and your body is healthy enough, you can actually make it to UFC champion. And I think that's the proper way to climb to, you know, to this level.
I think Mohammed Makhayev is a perfect example of that. Of course, former pound for pound number one. He, well, I believe 20-year-old, 21-year-old now, and already
Yeah,
signed to Brave, 4 pro fights. And I mean, the UFC were looking before he'd even finished his amateur tenure. He'd done his building, he'd done his learning on that International Mixed Martial Arts Federation stage, got signed to a
and
big promotion.
fighting as a youngster, he was fighting 80 to 21. He
Yeah,
only fought in adults here in Oceania.
yeah,
He won it and then he turned pro. So he was not even fighting adult. He's super safe, super good, and has no injuries. And now he turned pro. I think he did perfectly.
yeah, me too.
Yeah, sweet. Anything else you want to add, Jake?
Nah, I think we're good, Seb. It's been good. It's good to hear how things are going on in a side of the world where you've actually dealt with this all right and being able to put on shows like you did and the Open like you did a couple of weeks ago. Yeah,
Well, knocking wood, will get better, and also on your part of the world, we will get better. So we can have now in the international championships. I'm working towards the Europeans and towards the worlds. Also, like I have a youngster who won actually, you know, he won Oceanic Kids and he won now again on the Open. So I'm looking for him to compete on the Worlds for Kids. Hopefully they will happen and we'll be able to compete. We have a couple of guys who are actually going to prepare now in Russia in order to compete on the Worlds. So hopefully we have World Championships this year, so we will be able, you know, to show for what we're up to.
let's hope so.
Can you please tell how people can follow you? You have a very interesting YouTube channel, doing interviews with fighters, all your socials and stuff.
Yes, no problem. So my Twitter is Jake Smith Journo, like journalist, Journo. My Instagram is Jake_fight and talk. And the fight and talk one is just fight and talk. And that's the name of the YouTube channel as well. So yeah, I interview UFC, Bellator, Cage Warriors, all sorts of athletes over there. And there's some long form podcasts on there as well, if that's your type of thing.
Biff, I'm looking for it. You got send me links, please, so I can put them in the description so people can easily just click to them and follow. And thanks for your time.
I will do, not a problem, Seth. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to the Fight Zone podcast. Subscribe in your podcast app to receive the next episode. Stay strong and stay safe. This episode is brought to you by Tambourine Spring Water. Visit tambourinnesprings.com.au or call 0434 952 449 to order your water today. Tambourine Spring Water is a local business situated on Mount Tambourine. Their water is bottled at the source of their 163 meter deep privately owned spring. And Tambourine Springs, it's a matter of minutes from when the water is extracted from the ground to go into the bottle. They do not add any chemicals whatsoever to drinking water. It only goes through filters to remove sand and sediments that come with the water. When you purchase your water from Tambourine Springs Water, you know you will receive the best spring water Southeast Queensland has to offer from a local family on a mission to provide the best service and quality. Water companies are often blamed with a good reason for polluting the environment with plastic bottles. This is also not the case with Tambourine Spring Water. Your water is delivered to your door in 15 or 20 liter bottles, and your used bottles are collected, disinfected and refilled again. So zero plastic waste goes to the environment. Me, my family and my team are also using Tambourine Spring Water. Once you drink real spring water for a while, you cannot drink anymore from the sink or any commercial waters from the supermarket because they stink and have bad taste. Ridiculously enough, in Australia you can mix 50% of the water with tap water and label and sell it as spring water. This is not the case with Tambourine Spring Water. I personally know the family who owns it and have been numerous times in their small factory to see my water being bottled straight from the spring after the filtration process. Find out more at tambourinesprings.com.au or call 0434 952 449 to order your water today.